everyone. Welcome to the masterclass. We're just waiting for a couple more people to join. My name's Becky. I'm one of the producers here at LSX. So I'm just going to give a sort of a very brief housekeeping introduction, I get, to this masterclass. I'm sure a lot of you are very, very familiar with Zoom. But the first thing I would say is if everyone can have their cameras on. This is a masterclass. It's meant to be engaging and interactive. It's not a webinar. I know that a lot of people spend a lot of time on screens at the moment, but if you can, please put your video on if you are able to do so. It makes it a lot more friendly for everyone involved. So a couple of other points. If you want to ask questions during the session, we will be having a presentation, first of all, from Luke and David, and then moving on to the interactive Q&A part. However, during the presentation, you can still ask questions via the chat. So all you have to do is, when the presentation comes up, it will usually make it full screen. You can either hover at the bottom of the screen and you'll be able to see your chat function, or alternatively, you can press escape on your computer if you're on a computer, and it will minimize the screen so that you can then see the chat and ask a question. Alternatively, when the presentation is finished, if you want to ask a relevant question, you can either raise your hand, either like this via video, but there's actually a reaction button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If you click on that, there are various emojis, one of which is raise hand. So if you do that, you'll see that a little hand is now popped up, and then you can lower your hand once we've managed to get to your question, and also you've managed to ask it. Or alternatively, if Luke and David are literally just asking as you would in the real world, I'm sure we always remember what that's like. If you just want to jump in and ask a question, just unmute yourselves and ask away. As I said, it's designed to be interactive. So without further ado, we're getting lots of people coming in now. Again, not to hammer the point home, but most of you don't have your videos on. I can actually request for you to turn your videos on, so it just makes life much easier for me if you do that. So, but I'm going to hand over to Luke and David now to kick us off. So Luke, David, over to you.
Thanks. So Luke, do you want to lead the way, or should I start?
Please. So I'll just say a couple of things. So the presentation is going to be in two sections. The first part, David will take the lead and give us some really insights into how Affibody are working in part of their kind of strategy and drug development. And I'll follow up with some of the models that we see in a CRO perspective with our biotechs and innovative pharma. What will we discuss with them as well. So as Becky said, this is meant to be interactive. It's a bit different to just doing a presentation and doing a webinar. So make the most of it. David, please, all yours.
Yes. So thanks. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just on giving you guys an idea of what my day job is. And then I'll try to transition from there to the topic of the day when we're talking about optimizing how we work in this industry. So Luke, if you don't mind just switching to the coming slides. Yeah, we can take the next one as well. So just, for everyone's understanding, Affibody, we're a clinical stage biotech which works based on our proprietary technology platform, which we call the Affibody platform. And our idea is really that we're looking for places and spaces, in this case that's indications and targets, where we think that our platform can offer a inherent competitive advantage versus existing technologies. And we kind of position ourselves as somewhere in between big biologics, such as monoclonal antibodies, and traditional small molecular drugs that can be chemically synthesized. And I think we share advantages from both classes. We can be chemically synthesized. We can chemically synthesize our Affibody molecules, and we're also able to have the super high selectivity and specificity that you normally kind of think of for a monoclonal antibody. And this is it. Our core competence to a large extent is understanding what our platform can do. So if we move on. that kind of means that when we look at this pipeline, we're a little bit all over the place, right? So we're both in inflammatory and autoimmune diseases. We're in radiopharmaceuticals in cancer. We're looking at inhalation and working with that, and we're also doing a lot of like multi-specific stuff. And when you think about that, we don't really have a focus area in terms of therapy area. We have a focus on our platform and how to get the most out of the products coming out of that. So if we move to the next slide, that kind of means that we think that we have a growth engine, as I call it, which is our platform technology. Then we have this value chain of discovery, development, manufacturing, supply, and commercialization. And right now we're covering basically the first part of it. And supply, of course, we have clinical supply, but we don't really have commercial supply yet. We're not there as a company. And on the commercialization side, we're actually looking to do both partnerships as well as independent commercialization. And if you think about this is quite a lot for a biotech, and we all have this same kind of idea. Says biotech, you want to do a lot, you want to capture as much of the value chain you can, but you have to have a limited organization. So how do we actually, what do we focus on? So in terms of outsourcing. So if we move to the next slide. So, and this is probably different for different companies and different teams, etc. But to us, I mean, the growth engine being the platform and the kind of the drug discovery process that's related to that, we do very little outsourcing in that area. That's really kind of where our core competence is. But when we come to development, manufacturing, supply, and other areas, I mean, we do rely on partners a lot to capture these parts of the value chain. And I actually think that in this day and age, kind of strategic outsourcing is a key competence. And I also put into brackets the key risks for biotechs. Because when we look at our kind of risk matrix internally, dependency and loss of suppliers or clinical trial partners, that's a major risk that we're taking. And with that, if we move on to the next slide. So of course it's important to start thinking about if this is something you rely on, and if it's a key competence within the company and a key risk, how do you think about the choice of partners? There are some kind of there are quality answers to that. You should have your SOPs, you should do your request for proposals, you should do your reviews of the manufacturing site, review of the trial sites, audit, and all of that. But that's kind of operational, and I think there are good ways of fixing that. And if there's something I want to say about that before we move on, is that I think it's important that you have the ability to do the checks of your partners yourselves. You kind of do the due diligence of the partner. There has to be some sort of competence in-house to do that. And I put three kind of main bullets here that will tie into Luke's presentation and hopefully tie into our discussion afterwards. And I think what's important here, I mean, when you pick your partner, I mean, they have to be able to support your need today. And it's not about what your needs are tomorrow, and it's not about what your needs are were yesterday. And this is where it gets interesting, is because you have to understand what your needs are. And that's what I mean. There has to be a certain level of competence within your organization to understand what you need. And these needs will change. And this is the company's responsibility to understand. It's not Luke's responsibility to know when my needs as an organization change. And this is, so finding the right partner at the right time for your need that's what I mean by being a strategic competence for the small company, for the biotech. And it's also for that reason, I think it's important to really understand your partner. What are their strengths and what are their weaknesses? And hopefully you can have an open dialogue about that. And it's also something I wanted to put here in parentheses. I think it's important to actually understand your outsourcing partner's business model, because I mean, I hear a lot of ideas of how other companies are being run, but if you truly don't understand what drives them, not only what makes money, but what are the key costs, what are the key risks, etc., it's really hard for you to be a good to find a good partner and be a good partner as well. So I think that was basically what I had as an introduction from my end.
So David, maybe I can, I know we were going to have questions at the end. Maybe, can I ask you a couple of questions? Maybe if I could take this back up just here, right?
Yeah.
When we look at the platform technology, the fact that Affibody has a platform technology allows you to, really target different diseases using the platform technology. But as an organization, when you went from preclinical into the phase ones, what was the kind of risk concern that you had when did your needs change from here? And as you've gone into kind of the later stages, are you finding as an organization you've grown or something has changed? And I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, even though TFS is a clinical CRO, I'll speak broadly about that because we have outsourcing partner for manufacturing, toxicology, I mean, you name it. So, but it's kind of, at first, I think you have to be able to have more, I should say, full service providers. And by that, I don't necessarily mean that you outsource your thinking or your ideas, but it's a given that you probably have a smaller organization. And by full service providers, that could actually be a network of one-man bands, or it could be a one-stop shop. And I think there's no real good answer to what's the best, but definitely, I mean, when we did our first in-man study, I think we had 2 people doing all of clinical and GMP and toxicology. That was two in-house persons doing that. Whereas as today, I would say we have a clinical development organization of 10 to 15 people. So yes, there's a huge difference. Not only clinical, but a development organization, I should say, of 10 to 15 people. So it's a huge difference as you move along. And of course, that's what I mean, that your partner needs to be matching your needs today and how your company looks and what you have.
So one of the things, David, you kind of said is think about what you need today, not yesterday, but what's going on into the future. I'm interested into, what was your comfort level in terms of risk of taking your, first studies, etc., at the beginning to now where you're expanding into multiple regions and also, continents as such. How's that? Is it driven by the CRO? Is it driven internally? What's kind of impacted you as a decision maker to have that comfort level to expand? Do you see what I mean? I'm getting a sense check of what your thinking was. Yeah.
So I mean, so what we're not talking about here, there's two. Yes. I mean, it is. So how do we know that stuff works? Is there a competitive path, and how do we know that it will work? And I think that's important because it ties to outsourcing. So first of all, I think when starting a program from zero, you kind of have to have an idea what the product positioning should be. And I'm not necessarily talking about your fully fledged FDA approved TPP. I'm talking about this idea on why is my drug different, and what's the medical need, and what's the patient value I can deliver. And then I think your first studies are to some extent the most important one, because at least in our way of working, we sometimes call it experimental medicines, but what we actually mean is that we want to get some signs of efficacy as soon as we practically can. So the days of having a phase 1 that solely is safety, I mean, of course you have to test safety in a phase 1, that's a given, but today we also have to have this concept of hypothesis testing for the product profile. And I think that's also a reason why we were only 2 people doing the clinical trial in the first clinical trial. And that's, I mean, for our next program going into the clinic, that's exactly the same. It's basically 2 people running that part, even though we have a larger organization that can take that, because it's a question about de-risking. So and that's how you use your outsourcing partner in the de-risking process as well.
Thank you. Well, I'm kind of eked out your conversation here a bit. So
Yeah.
I'll go to some of my presentations, and we will have time to get the wider audience to participate in discussions and conversations. So if you have any questions, if you can initially put them into the chats, I'd appreciate it for David's section, and then I'll go on to the next section. So this part of it is really to give you a flavor, right? A flavor of the discussions that David's kind of highlighted, and how do we look at innovative biotechs and what are their needs, etc. And my talk is about 8 slides, but really, can you see this okay? Business models to meet the needs of innovative biotech, or am I blocking it with my cursor at the top? Can you see this, Becky?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, so part of the discussion with innovative biotech is, and kind of leads to what David had just said in terms of models. So you have, full service clinical development services, full service, from soup to nuts, from biostats through to, writing reports to doing your initial submissions, etc. All the technology. So that's what David was talking about. So in terms of how do you get that, to find an organization to do that. The second part of the kind of model is, as you get to a slightly more stable, multiple programs, multiple assets, you can consider, in some of the organizations, look at something called functional service provider. So think about pharmacovigilance. You want to have stability, consistency with your, pharmacovigilance reporting databases, etc. And you can apply that across multiple assets and development programs. Same with, say, data management, etc. Those are the easy examples. But sometimes what we have as an organization is those kinds of requests where we've got, both in biotech with multiple assets, but also with some of our innovative pharma customers coming to us for FSP models. And essentially, we provide a set of services where we manage as a CRO, but also, support multiple assets. And it's that line, horizontal line across assets that you provide. The third one here is strategic resourcing, right? This is a different kind of model. So what you've got is a need to say, if you take the example, you need a biostatistician, or you need a medical writer, or you go out and you go to an organization such as TFS or anywhere else, and you say, I need a biostatistician with this kind of capability for this period of time. You hire them, and they're there, they've done all the vetting, versus going through the traditional kind of the guys who your hiring model, some of the recruiters, that's the word I was looking for, recruiters, and going through that model. You're not recruiting somebody onto your staff, but you're utilizing for a certain period of time. And we get a lot of requests, and for specific needs and expertise. And a lot of the organizations that we work with, we almost get a mixed model. Sometimes where we've gone full service, we've then gone functional service, and then depending on need, by the way, we can actually provide you with somebody at this point in time for this service, like biostats, etc. And we go provide that. So it's a nimble, flexible approach in terms of services. And the last part, what we have, and kind of differentiates us as an organization, we have something called Connectify, and where we have access to multiple key opinion leaders across multiple therapeutic areas. And what we're able to do is to tap into those guys, and we have master service agreements, contracts with all of these KOLs as such. And what we do is bring them to the table, and often we provide them for advisory boards, or they become part of, the support. And what we're looking for with this service is to be available and meet the needs and expertise at a specific time without going into protracted contracts or etc. And our customers and a lot of the biotechs really appreciate this, and we really have some successful relationships going on there. So the question that was asked was, what are your needs, what do you want to go forward, and how do you de-risk? And there's various models out there that you can use. So understanding what the models are, understanding what you're going to invest in is going to be critical. And I can tell you, I've worked with a company out in the West Coast, and basically they'd made the decision that although they were going to, fully outsource, they developed an in-house biostatistician team that they wanted access to the data. They had data management and biostats that could manipulate the data and go in, but actually they gave full service outsourcing. And what that meant was, people like David at this particular company and others could go into the data, get their hands onto the data. They could look at, images, look at, progression, etc., or any of the biomarkers. And that's really important part of the early development and looking for signals, right? So depending on the organization, you can't do everything. The question is, what are your needs and what are you going to develop longer term? And I think this is a reasonable model that, most people would look at, and certainly the services out there. And in terms of size and fit, it's finding that relationship with a functional group, or the business lines as we call them as such, that you get that connection at various levels in your organization to be able to develop what your needs are and carry them through the trial process and also across multiple assets. So I wanted to throw in this slide. I really like this slide, and it was an article that was published. And traditionally we've had drug development, and the first column per se is anything up to 10 years, where you go, dose escalation. You're looking at PK/PD. You're doing a 3+3 design. They go to a phase 2, then you go to a phase 3, right? What we've seen, and I think the checkpoint inhibitors are indicative, and you've seen the COVID studies as well, but the checkpoint inhibitors basically changed the paradigm of being able to, and this is the right-hand side, to go through going through that initial phase 1 study, looking for efficacy, identifying what the targets were, and targeted medicine as such, and then saying, well, we can really narrow down our population and show a significant impact on patients' well-being, and the outputs both in biomarkers, predictive biomarkers and biomarkers, and then clinical outcomes. And what we've seen is multiple arms, and you can see this on the study design, multiple arms going from phase 1, taking them through to pivotal registration studies. And that data has allowed organizations to have fast-track status, etc., and expedited approval processes, etc. So I think the design process is critical. We talk about, David talked about target product profile, of understanding what your product going to do, where it fits, etc., but also that pathway in terms of development pathway and study designs. We have come across, and I'll just share some information about, basically, traditionally the 3+3 design is there, and some of the studies in healthy volunteers are SAD, single ascending dose, or multiple ascending dose. But what we're seeing with the 3+3 designs is getting to a phase of adding in combinations, doing comparators, etc., and then really setting up the study in that phase 1A, phase 1B into a phase 2A study to design your pivotal registration study as such. And it's a continuation with protocol amendments. The interesting thing is there's multiple basket study designs and sophisticated statistical models as such you can use, but unless you've got a really good understanding of the adverse event profile or off-target profile together with the dose response, and then a biostatistician who can, manipulate or create a program and define the parameters to dose escalate. It's a tough challenge to do that, and you can have accelerated titration doses, etc., designs, and we have access to a number of multiple organizations with multiple designs. I kind of throw out here, David, in terms of yourself and in Affibody, this study design period, and what's the approach that you've taken? I'd be interested to hear a little bit more.
So, I mean, we're basically, I think one of the answers is that I truly believe that you're right, that we're seeing this. I mean, nowadays, a phase 1 could be 1,000 patients and give you an approval. That's how it is. But what we're actually looking for, we should also be honest about the fact who are the companies doing those studies. It's not normally the small biotechs doing that, but there are ways for you to move along that path. And one of the things that you learn from this is that, I mean, can you find signals? And that's what I'm kind of hung up on this term, signs of efficacy, and I use it on purpose as signs of efficacy, because I can mean biomarkers. So there could be, I mean, it could make sense to run a healthy volunteer trial as your first in man if you have a biomarker of function, or that's correlated to disease in such a great way that you can rapidly move over to the patient population. But that's actually a lot rarer than you normally hope. So what, I mean, we're trying to always include patients in first studies. It's a bit harder, I should say, in some of the immunological conditions where there are fairly established ways of treatment guidelines, etc., and a strong, I mean, there's a strong love for placebo in some of these academic circles, which I mean, I actually don't get. I mean, I understand that you want to differentiate effect and so on, but it's, in 2021 that we're still giving placebo to patients in need of treatment. It beats me, because I mean, in cancer, you're on top of standard of care, but that's not always the case in inflammatory conditions. So.
Okay, thank you. And again, I recommend you go have a look at this if you haven't. It's a really nice article that gives you a detailed description. So I kind of switching slightly, and we talked about preclinical, clinical development, post-approval. So one of the interesting parts of, what your needs are and understanding what you need today versus what you need tomorrow, right, is a really important part. And if you're a clinical phase biotech and you're going into a phase 1, phase 2, having that target product profile and looking at where you're going to be able to go and looking at the timelines and the safety signals together with efficacy is going to be critical, and understanding that pathway is going to be key, right? And there's various steps that you can have a look at, and in terms of doing risk analysis, de-risking, and who your partners are, where do you bring in support, so that ultimately you're looking at getting the right design for that phase 2, phase 3 pivotal registration study, that you're going to be able to meet your endpoints, and then you've got the right investigators and who are going to put those right patients in, and those inclusion exclusion criteria. The other interesting thing that we're seeing at TFS is the real world pulse marketing studies, and what we're seeing is a lot of organizations looking at real world evidence to then design some of the studies that they're looking at in some of the rare and pediatric studies as well. The data out there in real world evidence is also framing what's being taken back to the agencies for a pivotal phase 1, phase 2 discussion. And what we found, some of the rare disease studies, that some of the agencies are saying, do you know what, you guys going to have enough data with the pediatric rare disease population, you need to start to file, because we're seeing a significant signal or efficacy, and we want to approve this a particular product as such. So it's important you understand the pathway, where you are and where you're going, and some of the decision points in terms of regulatory support, medical support, and also clinical, right? So and to that effect, I've kind of thrown in, your clinical development team. One of the interesting things, on the other side of the fence from the biotechs is that within the CRO world, you have internally teams who are saying, guys, we want to work with this particular biotech because why we come to work is to work on innovative medicine. We want to bring treatment to patients. And our teams want to be part of that development team. And, whether it's clinical, whether it's medical or regulatory, this is why a lot of our teams come to work, right? So, and depending on what your need is and what support you need, right? It's kind of deciding, where are you going to develop your strength? Where do you need immediate needs and where do you have future needs? And I think the models of what we talked about earlier are important within the setting of, where you are in your development plan or your assets as such. So I think this is a nice way of talking about the clinical development team. And I'm going to skip because I want to make sure that we have enough time for a conversation with the wider team as such. So some of the things that we often asked when people are going for, Series A funding, etc., looking at timelines, budgets, market, what's happening in the competitive environment, and also what is the cost. Service fees, pass-through fees, vendors, etc. And it's important that, we have a full picture because, often CROs with service fees, that's what they get paid, but the pass-throughs are just a pass-through cost. There is no markup. But actually for a biotech, it's critical. What are you charging for your investigators' fees? What are you charging for your labs? Where are the biggest risks and changes that are going to impact the total budget? And you don't want to have a second discussion. Excuse me a second. There we go. And then obviously the key is having, your expertise in your operational teams of what you're going to get from your partner in terms of supporting functions. And I quite like this slide because it basically tells you have your initial strategy development and you have the complete life cycle and some of the different services that you should be looking at and where the expertise are. It's going to be important. And this kind of gives you that summary. Where is it you need support, more support than less, or are you going to use a particular organization for a particular skill set? And I think this gives you that overview. Just to wrap up my discussion, and I think, part of the discussion, and you heard it from David and, the Affibody team, is that organizational fit. What we're looking for and what our partners are looking for is, do we deliver every time? Not the once, but the twice, but are we consistent, right? Consistent delivery, and do we do it every time? Everybody says they're going to give you the A team. Everybody says they have expertise, but do you get it across assets? Do you get that continuity as you develop your assets? And I think, as you will have seen, change is inevitable through a development program, through any assets, going from phase 1 to phase 2, your needs are very different. And do you have a culture of being nimble, flexible, and are your teams able to adapt? And is the CRO able to adapt with it? And getting that fit is going to be really, really critical. And I think the biggest thing that comes back to me, and you can ask David as well, is listening. Do we listen to our customers, our biotechs, and at the team level, and collaborate, and then do something about what we're seeing or where our corporate goals are for a particular biotech company? And that's really important. It's not something you can kind of say you do, but actually the team have to live it, breathe it. And I think that part of being part of the clinical development team really helps. The other part, selecting your CRO, is investment in technology. Is the organization investing in technology that is going to enhance and deliver your programs in a sophisticated way? And then lastly, what we're finding, and most organizations found this, is the partnership, right? Through COVID, partnership models of go to the people you trust, or are you going to look for other vendors that you can bring on to the team to enhance your development programs. And often, depending on how you work, is the financial models and the operational models. Do we have skin in the game? And partnerships often mean something different to different people. And I think, you have to know what you mean by partnership, both financially and operationally. I think, oh, excuse me. Right, I'm gonna say questions and I'm gonna stop sharing here.